If you've watched Netflix crime documentaries, you might think all serial killers are white. Spoiler alert, black serial killers exist and their crimes are just as brutal. If names like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy give you the chills, then you're in for more chills. Today's video will reveal black serial killers you've never heard of but should fear. Billy Kemmermeer, State, Texas. Between 2016 and 2018, more than 20 women died in their Texas retirement homes. Police assumed the deaths were natural because all the women were older than 70 years. However, the killer was Billy Kemmermeer, a former healthcare worker from Kenya. He was finally caught after an elderly woman survived his attack and reported it to the police, according to People. Authorities found that Kemmermeer used his job to target wealthy, older women to rob and kill them. First, in July 2012, police arrested Kemmermeer for assaulting a woman he was with. He had repeatedly kicked and punched her. He also beat her with a pot and later stabbed her with a knife in the chair. He received a 70-day jail sentence after pleading no contest. In 2016, authorities caught Kemmermeer trespassing twice at Edgemere Retirement Community. On both occasions, he used the name Benjamin Koitaba. During the second arrest in July of that year, he presented identification with both his real name and the Koitaba alias. He again pleaded no contest and received another 70-day sentence. He was released after serving 12 days due to good behavior. Later, police began investigating 3 deaths at the facility that may have been connected to Kemmermeer. Police accused Kemmermeer of posing as a medical professional or maintenance worker to gain access to the homes of at least 21 elderly people. Authorities in several North Texas communities have investigated Kemmermeer for more victims. They believe that some deaths previously reported as natural may be connected to him. Investigators said that Kemmermeer was likely motivated by robbery and that he stole jewelry from some victims, which he then sold online. On March 19, 2018, Mary Annis Bartell, née Crawford, a resident of Preston Place Retirement Community in Plano, Texas, told police that Kemmermeer had attempted to smother her with a pillow the previous day. "Go to bed, don't fight me," were the words he said to her. Bartell lost consciousness during the attack. After the assailant left her apartment, a neighbor found her and called the authorities. Using Bartell's description, police arrested Kemmermeer at his home the next day, on March 20th. Officers had seen Kemmermeer throw a jewelry box into a dumpster before going inside. An examination of the item led police to a final victim, Lou Thee Harris, who was found dead in her home the same evening. Bartell and an anonymous Plano resident are the only known surviving victims. In May 2019, the court indicted Kemmermeer on 11 additional counts of capital murder. On February 7, 2020, the trial was set for April 5, 2021. The trial later got delayed to November 12, 2021. Kemmermeer's trial began on November 15, 2021. On November 19, 2021, a judge declared a mistrial because the jury was deadlocked 11-1. Kemmermeer's retrial began on April 25, 2022. On April 28, 2022, the court convicted Kemmermeer of the murder of Harris and sentenced him to life in prison. Kemmermeer's trial for the murder of Mary Brooks began on October 3, 2022. On October 7, 2022, the court convicted Kemmermeer of Mary Brooks's murder and sentenced him to life in prison. Kemmermeer's cellmate killed him on September 19, 2023, at the Caulfield Unit in Tennessee Colony, Anderson County, Texas. He was 50 years old. Eric Adams, State, Nevada. Police said they connected Adams to the fatal shooting of 5 women and the critical injury of a teenage girl. In a statement, police said they found a woman in her 40s and another woman in her 50s shot to death at an apartment. During the investigation, officers learned that a girl, aged 13, had been taken to the hospital in critical condition from gunshot wounds. Police then searched the apartment building for more victims and found the bodies of 2 women and a man, all of whom had been shot to death. However, by the time officers found Adams in North Las Vegas, he had fatally shot himself with his weapon. Henry Louis Wallace, State, North Carolina, also known as the Taco Bell Strangler, Wallace is responsible for the deaths of 11 black women in South Carolina and North Carolina. The spree lasted from 1990 to 1994. On March 8, 1990, Wallace murdered Tashonda Bethia, aged 18, a student at Barnwell High School. He dumped her body in a lake in his hometown. Several weeks later, authorities discovered her corpse. Police questioned Wallace about her disappearance and death, but they never formally charged him with murder. He was also questioned about the attempted of a girl, aged 16, from Barnwell, but was not charged. In May 1992, Wallace picked up Sharon Nance, a convicted drug dealer and prostitute. Wallace beat her to death when she asked for payment for her services, then dropped her body by the railroad tracks. She was found a few days later. In June 1992, Wallace and strangled Caroline Love, aged 20, at her apartment, then dumped her body in a wooded area. Love was a friend of Wallace's girlfriend. After he killed her, Wallace, his girlfriend, and her sister filed a missing persons report at the police station. It would be almost 2 years before her body was discovered in a wooded area in Charlotte. On February 19, 1993, Wallace strangled Shauna Hawk, a college student, at her home after first raping her and later went to her funeral. Hawk had worked at Taco Bell, where Wallace was her supervisor. On June 22nd, Wallace and strangled his Taco Bell co-worker and manager, Audrey Spain, aged 24. Her body was found 3 days later. On August 10th of the same year, Wallace and strangled Valencia M. Jumper, a college student from Columbia, South Carolina. He then set her body on fire to cover up the crime. A few days after her murder, Wallace and his sister went to Valencia's funeral, even sending her family condolences. A month later, on September 14, 1993, Wallace went to the apartment of Michelle Stinson, a college student and friend of his from Taco Bell. He and sometime later strangled and stabbed her in front of her oldest son. Wallace committed more murders until 1994. He was arrested on March 13, 1994. For 12 hours, he confessed to murdering 10 women in Charlotte. He then admitted to an 11th murder committed before moving to Charlotte. Wallace described the women's appearances in detail, including how he robbed and killed them. His trial began in September 1996. During opening arguments, prosecutor Marcia Goodnow asked for the death penalty. On January 7, 1997, Wallace was found guilty of 9 murders. On January 29th, the court sentenced him to death 9 times. He was convicted of all the murders he confessed to, except for Bethia and Nance. Wallace is currently awaiting execution at Central Prison in Raleigh. Roberta Elder, State, Georgia, the wife of Reverend William M. Elder, caused his death and also poisoned 2 of their children with her cooking. She was charged with their murders. During her trial, it became clear that she had killed beyond her household. Authorities accused her of killing up to 13 people, including 2 ex-husbands, 3 of her children, a grandson, a cousin, and her own mother. The killings may have started as early as 1938, but no one suspected murder until Reverend William M. Elder died after eating bananas and cheese in 1952. Reverend Elder, a respected Baptist preacher in Atlanta, Georgia, lost his daughter Fannie Mae to pneumonia 1 year before his death, and another daughter, Annie Pearl, died of pneumonia 2 years earlier. The same coroner who examined his daughters was puzzled when Reverend Elder's skin looked ruddy and his body was emaciated. Concerned about the multiple deaths in the Elder family, the coroner tested Reverend Elder for arsenic poisoning, which shows symptoms similar to pneumonia. After finding arsenic in his body, the coroner alerted authorities about the multiple deaths coming from the Eason Street home where the Elder family lived. Police immediately focused on Reverend Elder's wife, Roberta. Roberta and William had been married for just over 2 years when he died. They lived together with William's 5 children from a previous marriage. However, 2 died soon after. William, a construction worker, became violently ill at work after saying he had eaten bananas and cheese. Roberta called a doctor who prescribed medicine and instructed the family to call if Reverend Elder did not show improvement within a specified time. The doctor was not called again until William was dying. Reverend Elder's children noticed that Roberta gave him milk of magnesia, as she had given their sisters, to ease symptoms. Later, they suspected she used it to administer poison. The surviving family members showed symptoms of arsenic exposure and received treatment. Each deceased Elder family member had a life insurance policy taken out in their name by Roberta. Police ordered the exhumation of Annie Pearl and Fannie Mae. They found arsenic in the women's hair, which police believed was enough evidence to arrest Roberta Elder. As the investigation continued, police discovered Roberta Elder left a trail of bodies starting in 1938, with the death of her common-law husband, John Woodward. They identified 10 more possible victims who died mysteriously while living with Roberta. Roberta took out life insurance policies on several of the deceased, with amounts ranging from $50 to $225. The largest policies were $500 on Reverend Elder and $550 on Fannie Mae. She collected on the policies after their deaths. Roberta was convicted and sentenced to life in prison based on circumstantial evidence. She is believed to be buried in Watkinsville Cemetery under the name Roberta Elder. Her grave marker shows no birth year and lists her death year as 1973. Anthony Robinson, State, Virginia. Robinson murdered at least 4 women in the Washington, D.C. area and transported their bodies using shopping carts. On October 24, 2021, the night of her murder, Redmond told her family she was going to a football game with a friend named Aunt A. Anthony. Redmond's daughter had never heard of Anthony before. Redmond's remains were found with her hands bound in an undeveloped lot in Harrisonburg, Virginia, near the Howard Johnson Motel. The cause of death is disputed. One source stated blunt force trauma, while others suspected asphyxiation due to a cord being tied around Redmond's neck. Smith, aged 39, went missing on November 19, 2021. The last location from her phone data was the Howard Johnson Hotel in Harrisonburg. Her body was found 15 feet away from Redmond's on November 25th, although authorities confirmed the 2 women were murdered at different times. Like Redmond's, Smith's cause of death is disputed. Like Redmond and Smith, Brown's remains were found near a hotel, the Moon Inn Hotel, about 130 miles from the Howard Johnson Motel. Her body was placed in a container next to a shopping cart with another victim, Stephanie Harrison. Both women's bodies were so decomposed that authorities could only identify Brown by a tattoo. Police found evidence that she had been communicating with Robinson on a dating app days before her murder. Video footage showed Brown and Robinson at the same metro station, and that she stayed at the Moon Inn Hotel at the same time as Robinson. Her cause of death remains unknown. After authorities found the video evidence, Robinson was arrested on November 23, 2021. In January 2025, Robinson went to trial for the murders of Beth Redman and Tanita Smith. Nagy argued that it was impossible to know what happened in the hotel rooms on the day of the victims' deaths, and that the video footage, though suspicious, was not enough to prove anything. The jury took only 30 minutes to find him guilty and recommended the maximum sentences for each of the crimes. Robinson is scheduled to be sentenced in September 2025. Keith Gibson, State, Delaware/Pennsylvania. Gibson murdered between 2 and 6 people in Delaware and Pennsylvania from January to June 2021. The murders happened less than a month after he was paroled from serving time for manslaughter conviction dating back to 2008. In the early morning hours of July 6, 2008, Gibson, along with accomplices James Hinson and Kelly Gibbs, shot and killed Stanley Savon Jones during a robbery in Edgemoor, Delaware. After interviewing witnesses and examining bullet casings, police arrested Gibson at his mother's home in September and charged him with Jones's murder. In 2010, he was convicted of murder and unlawful possession of a weapon. He received a 20-year sentence. After serving more than 12 years in prison, he was paroled in June 2020 to a community corrections facility. Shortly after, a complaint was filed against him for fighting with other offenders, and he was returned to prison. He remained there until December 20th, when he was released again and placed on 18 months of probation. In early January 2021, Gibson left Delaware and returned to Philadelphia, violating the conditions of his parole. By mid-January, he showed up at his mother's home, where they argued frequently because of Keith's aggressive behavior. On January 28, Gibson entered the Al Medina Traders store in the Germantown neighborhood, whereupon he shot and killed 2 customers, Eric Flores and Roy Caban. The former was shot once in the head, while the latter was shot twice in the face. A passerby discovered their bodies. In the early hours of February 8th, he went to his mother, Christine's workplace at United Piers RHD in East Falls, where she worked as a supervisor, before shooting her once in the head and killing her on the spot. A co-worker later discovered her body. The following day, while police were investigating his mother's murder, officers interviewed Keith and discovered he was violating his parole conditions. When they confirmed he had absconded, he was extradited to Delaware to face prosecution. After completing his sentence, he was permitted to leave Delaware and move to Philadelphia, where parole authorities continued to monitor him. On May 15th, Gibson entered a Metro by T-Mobile store in Ellesmere, Delaware. He dragged clerk Leslie Licketh Ruiz Basilio to the back of the store and shot her in the head. After committing the murder, Gibson stole cash and several cell phones before fleeing the scene in Leslie Ruiz Basilio's SUV. The entire incident was captured on CCTV, but the killer could not be immediately identified because he was wearing a mask. Gibson soon left Delaware and returned to Philadelphia, where he lived on the streets for the next few weeks. On June 5th, he went to the Fairhill neighborhood with the intent to rob a Dunkin' Donuts store. At around 5 o'clock in the morning, he waited for Christine Lugo to open the store. When she did, he pushed her inside and forced her at gunpoint to hand over $300 and shot her in the head. This incident was also captured on CCTV, but this time, Gibson did not attempt to hide his identity. The next day, Gibson committed his final crime. He shot and killed drug dealer Ronald Wright during a street robbery in Wilmington, Delaware. On June 8, 2021, police officers in Wilmington arrested Gibson shortly after he robbed a local Rite Aid at gunpoint. On November 14, 2023, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gibson guilty on all charges. In March 2024, Delaware Superior Court Judge Ferris Wharton sentenced him to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 2 murders, plus 296 years for robbery, attempted murder, and other charges. After his trial in Delaware concluded, Gibson began awaiting extradition to Philadelphia, where he is expected to stand trial for the remaining 4 murders. On September 24, 2024, Gibson was charged with contempt of court after repeatedly interrupting testimony during a preliminary hearing for his upcoming trial in Philadelphia. He was removed from the courtroom after interrupting the speaker at least 10 times. Samuel Little, State, California. Samuel is one of the most prolific serial killers, not only because of his crimes, but also because he confessed to many unsolved murders just 2 years before he died. He had been committing murders since the 1950s. However, he was finally sentenced in 2014 for killing 3 women in the 1980s. Later, his DNA was linked to another series of strangulations. In an interview with a Texas Ranger, he confessed to unsolved murders in over a dozen states, bringing the total number of victims to 93. Little was arrested on September 5, 2012, at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. He was then extradited to California to face a narcotics charge. Afterward, authorities used DNA testing to link him to the murders of Linda Alford, who was killed on July 13, 1987, Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, killed on September 3, 1987, and Audrey Nelson Everett, killed on August 14, 1989. All 3 women were murdered and later found on the streets of Los Angeles. Little was extradited to Los Angeles, where he was charged on January 7, 2013. Little stood trial for the murders of Alford, Nelson, and Apodaca in September 2014. The prosecution presented DNA evidence and testimony from witnesses whom he had attacked at different times during his criminal career. On September 25, 2014, Little was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before his death, Little was serving his sentence at California State Prison in Los Angeles County. Maury Travis, State, Missouri. The infamous videotape killer was linked by investigators to the murders of 12 workers in St. Louis, according to Fox 2 Now. He lured women to his home using money or substance and would tie them up and kill them. After each murder, Travis discarded the bodies along the road. He continued this heinous act for 3 years. Police identified Travis by tracing his movements through a series of interactive maps and located his home. Bloodstains covered every part of the house. In the basement, officers found various women's belongings and several videotapes of him torturing and abusing his victims. At least one videotape showing Travis murdering and torturing some of his victims was found in the search of his home in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. Alicia Greenwade's body was discovered on April 1, 2001 in Illinois. She was last seen in Missouri. Betty James's body was found about 2 months later in Missouri, after she was last seen in Illinois. From May to October 2001, 4 other women were tortured and strangled: Teresa Wilson, Verona Thompson, Yvonne Cruz, and Brenda Beasley. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch published a profile on Wilson. In response, Travis sent an anonymous letter and a computer-generated map. The letter showed a return address linked to iThraldom, a bondage website, but included no other identifying information. Investigators recognized that the map came from Expedia.com. They traced it back to Travis, which led to his arrest. In his letter to the newspaper, Travis wrote, "I'll tell you where many others are." He added, "To prove I'm real, here are directions to number 17. Travis was arrested on a federal criminal complaint. While in U.S. Marshals Service custody, he was held at a St. Louis County jail in Clayton. Before his trial could begin, Travis hanged himself in his jail cell On June 10, 2002, Wayne Williams, State, Georgia. In 1981, Williams was arrested for murdering 2 adult men. During his trial, prosecutors said he was also responsible for 22 child murders in Atlanta. Williams denied the charges, but forensic evidence from his home and car linked him to several victims. Williams was arrested on June 21, 1981, for the murders of Cater and Payne. His trial began on January 6, 1982, in Fulton County. During the 2-month trial, prosecutors presented fiber evidence from 19 sources linked to Williams's home and car. The evidence included his bedspread, bathroom, gloves, clothes, carpets, dog, and a rare carpet fiber. Witnesses also testified placing Williams with several victims while they were alive. Plus, his inconsistent accounts of his whereabouts further damaged his case. Williams had claimed the carpet in his home was installed in 1968. However, the expert testimony stated it was a rare type not manufactured until the 1970s. It was later revealed that the company that produced the carpet did not exist until 1971. Williams took the stand in his defense but alienated the jury by becoming angry and combative. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on February 27th of the murders of Cater and Payne. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Notably, the killings stopped after Williams became a suspect. Harrison Graham, State, Pennsylvania. During the summer of 1987, Graham's neighbors complained to the landlord about a foul odor coming from Harrison's apartment. After ignoring several complaints, on August 9th, the landlord demanded that Harrison leave the premises. However, he refused to let anyone inside. He boarded up the front door, then gathered his items and escaped through the fire escape. When the landlord still could not enter the apartment, he called the police. The police officers broke down the door, only to find the naked corpse of a black woman and the partially dressed corpse of another. There were traces of blood, drugs, as well as a layer of garbage 40 centimeters high, dirty mattresses, and a skeleton. In the closet, more skeletonized remains, wrapped up in a blanket, were found. While inspecting the roof, the investigators found a green duffel bag, which contained the bones of the hands, feet, and legs of another murder victim. Since all but 2 of the bodies were in a state of severe decomposition, the police found it difficult to determine their cause of death. The cause for the other 2 was determined to be strangulation. Graham was put on a wanted list, and during the following week, he was reportedly seen on public transport, at fast food restaurants, at homeless shelters, and a car wash, but avoided arrest each time. On August 17th, Harrison tracked down his mother. After much persuasion, she convinced him to surrender and then called the police. Philadelphia police officers, Ed Spangler and Larry Bersicki, arrested Graham the same day, about 10 blocks from the apartment. They took him to the police station, where he quickly confessed to all the killings. Harrison Graham's trial began on March 7, 1988. On April 28, 1988, the court found Graham guilty on all charges. He received 6 death sentences and 1 life sentence for the murders. As an act of leniency, the court ruled that the death sentences would only start after he served his life sentence, meaning he will never be executed. If you enjoy the way we create videos and would like us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth dives.